Good evening, everybody. How y'all doing tonight? All right, welcome to the Medieval Swag Armor Fashion Show. I will be one of your hosts, Sim Holloway, and this, our esteemed guest, is
Trey Sutter.
And we're going to be hosting the fashion show. And if you're in the back, feel free to scoot on up. We still got room up front. Just crowd on in. If you like to, you get a better look at the models. We have about 13 on the list to take a look at. Feel free to take all the pictures you like. Make sure if Rich shows up, we're going to catcall him. Okay? We're going to have some fun tonight. Not just talk about the authenticity or the accuracy, though we will talk about that. We're also going to try to have some fun in the process. Trey, any opening comments before we get started?
Not at this moment, but is there anybody that was here last year for the fashion show? All right, you're going to see some new looks this year. Obviously, we're not going to try to do the same looks year after year after year. So please let us know which models most tickle your fancies this year. So we'll see which ones we can return next season. Other than that, let's get them started
on the road. All right, so the first one coming down the road here, and I want you to step quickly as you come on down so we can make sure we have things going on. Let's have the second person stage near the camera. First, we have a 1st century Roman centurion. He's wearing a lorica amata. Go ahead, stop, turn around. Give him a good pose. The sword he has just drawn is a, like right in front of the whole crowd at Drag.
Gladius.
Gladius, thank you. It is a gladius meant for stabbing. He is carrying a shield called a scutum. And sir, if you would please turn around, let him see a back view of that shield. It might not be quite what you expected. It has a horizontal grip, which allows for great shield wall effectiveness when you have lots of people together. And on his feet, sir, you can walk down this way, walk back. He has a set of
Caligula.
Something like Caligula. And they are studded Roman boots. Sir, can you poke your foot up in the air so everybody can see this?
Oh, keep poking.
What a stud. Hey, don't be looking up under that tunic. Or do be, you know, whatever. And he has a modular Roman helmet. Noah, what's that called? Shout it out. Galaga. Galaga. Galaga 5000. Let's cheer for the Roman. And keep your cameras ready. We're going to have them all back up at the end for a nice group photo and some questions if we have some time. The next one coming down the road is a 9th century Viking. Robert is dressed with warm clothing. You can see lots of wool, lots of linen. Let's take a look at that undertunic there, sir. Be a little scandalous for us.
Only the best linen for you. If there's any outfit more appropriate for the Georgia summer, it would be wool and linen. Wearing an outer layer of wool. And no pesky laces to deal with, of course. We have only the finest toggles on the shoes to keep things going together. As well, the one major aspect that's a flaw with this outfit is they invented a way to survive the Dark Ages, but they couldn't figure out pockets. So he did have to pick up, at con, a very effective dice bag.
Thank you, Rob. Sir, let's hear it for Robert. Next one coming down the line is Josh Waters. He is wearing 11th century Norman. Trey, you can take it from here.
All right. Welcome to the Bayou Tapestry. Straight out of the pages of history, Spangin' helm, chainmail, 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 and some more chainmail. Underneath of all of that is some padding just so that he can survive the chainmail. Yes, it is armor made out of basically a collection of holes, but it was able to keep man safe on the battlefield for the better part of 500 years. This outfit would have covered over a multi-century period of time and slowly would have led way to larger, heavier, and even more uncomfortable suits of armor that you'll see later today. Rattle, rattle, rattle. You never hear stories about the Normans sneaking up on anybody.
Now, Warface. All right, walk to the other side there, Josh.
The Spangin' helm was used in many different countries, many different places, and if needed to be, it could always double as a soup pot. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Norman invasion.
One of the differences you'll notice, if you've seen the Lorica segmentata, the Roman large plate system, that used much larger plates than we're seeing on this style. After the fall of Rome, they didn't have the foundries that were necessary. So during the Dark Ages and early Middle Ages, the armor became smaller plates. Those are the spanging plates inside the helmet. As the technology re-progressed back to foundries, the larger plates showed up again, the larger single-piece helmets that we'll see later. Next up, we have Morgan Hatt in 11th century Norman civilian clothing. She's wearing a very classic 12th century English cloak with a hood attached. They were exported all across the Roman Empire because of their fashion as well as their warmth and utility. These were known as British cloaks. They were thick wool, particularly good for weatherproof and waterproof. Nobles and wealthy merchants lined their cloaks with this for warmth. The cheaper skins of lamb, sheep, goat, and wool were generally worn by the common folks. This one today is a cloak of thick wool lined with fox. Morgan, we'll walk on down this way. Doing a nice pose. Channeling Elsa.
You said she was a foxy lady.
Come on back down. And under the cloak, we have the traditional Norman lady's dress and veil. Ooh. Oh, dang.
Someone who's suddenly much cooler in the room.
The long sleeves were a traditional fashion statement, but also a great way to keep your hands warm if you didn't have gloves. Let's hear it for Morgan. Next up, we have Ivan the Terrible.
As we stated earlier, chainmail was an easy piece of material for the armorers to be able to work at the time period, and we're looking almost 200 years later than the Norman period that you saw earlier. You'll see it's still one of the primary forms of protection on the battlefield. With the addition, you start seeing plates being able to protect the arms, the shins, and larger plates of metal being able to be used on the helmets. So technology was catching up on what they'd lost 600 years ago when the when the collapse of Rome led to the loss of so much knowledge for such a long period of time. But you start to see the beginning from the arming of just the chainmail that you saw on the Norman to the beginning of more metal being incorporated into the most vital places. Arms and legs were around the shield. They're the most viable targets. So head, arms, and legs got the solid plates of metal first.
So, Ivan, if you would hold your axe up nice and high. Okay. Y'all see that axe? Does that look like it'd be fun to hit somebody with? Yeah. Does it look like it'd be fun to be hit with? Yeah. I can promise you it's not super fun to be hit with, but this man right here, as well as many of the folks in the Armor Fashion Show tonight, are going to be competing and fighting in the armor that they're wearing out here tonight. Ivan will be doing so with that axe. Help us all. And that will be tomorrow in the Sheridan Grand Ballroom, starting at 11:30 for the first half of the tournament, and then at 4 o'clock for the second half. In between, we have Emma, and also a foam fighting tournament, but this man right here with that axe will be trying to hit some of us in the head and other various places. Let's hear it for Ivan. Next up on the list is Amy Graham in 13th century Viking civilian clothing.
Everyone is aware, of course, that Viking is not a noun. Viking is a verb, correct? Everyone knew this? They go a Viking, and she looks like she's ready to go raiding right now. Any men that are able to be raided, please let her know later. She'll be landing a boarding party shortly. The typical Viking outfit usually worked off of a basic underdress and then aprons to suit, and you could change depending on your climate, your style, and how you were trying to impress. Obviously, the amount of bling and beads, as well as additional tools and implements were often hung off of it. So much like Batman's utility belt, you always had a tool at hand when needed. Welcome to the Viking Age.
If you notice around her neck, she's wearing a torque and also has one or two very nice bracelets made by Crafty Kelp. Yes. Crafty Kelp is one of the jewelers for the Vikings program. and has been honored even before that with his historical accuracy for very beautiful and very good Viking and Norse jewelry.
And he's in the merchants area.
Yeah, this is a Norse boar, which is my totem animal, so he does fabulous work. So.
Thank you, Amy. Let's hear it for him. Y'all remember that rich guy I told you about? He's here now. Let's hear it for Rich Ellswig in 1380s English.
As we said, as we're moving back through history, they're able to work larger and more impressive pieces of metal, piece by piece, so you start getting more solid plates. You also heard about this thing called the English longbow, or the Welsh longbow if you're typically Welsh and you want to say it right. They started being able to punch through layers of chainmail. That layer of holes wasn't stopping the arrows of the time. So they meant larger and larger amounts. Now you've moved away from just the arms and the legs and the helmets having metal, you start getting breastplates and backplates to be able to stop the more impressive impact of the day. Oh no, not that.
You thought Deadpool was under here, didn't you? No, you didn't.
One of the interesting things about this style of flat visor helmet is that strap on there, you don't really have any evidence of. And that's not to dig at Rich here, it's just a very interesting historical conundrum. The illustrations as well as the effigies that show this type of helmet don't show a strap or a lower hinging system. With these classic German visors, they hinged it at a single hinge at the very top, which doesn't do a wonderful job of holding it down. We're not completely sure how they were held down all the time, so we have to add a leather strap, or in my clap visor's case, we rivet it down. But even still, that's one of the mysteries of the armor that we're still working on. We'd love to find out if you happen to know. Pass us a comment.
This may be why none of the fighters from the 14th century made it to the current day.
Let's hear it for Rich. Next up we have Hannah Hudson in 14th century Mongol. 14th century Mongol has lots of hard words to pronounce, so forgive me. This armor is known as a katangu degel, and a robe of iron. Variations were around for over 700 years, all the way up until 1900. This was used by the Mongols. This particular cut was popular in the Golden, or Russian horde, and the Ming, or China horde, or the Qing, or China dynasty. You can notice on this armor it has tons of mobility. If you would, Hannah, just swing your legs around, kick, jump, do something. Great mobility here, as well as multiple layers of protection. This was very useful for very mobile warriors that had to be on a horse and controlling it with their legs, in addition to using their arms to use a bow while riding, but having the ability to dismount, fight, and get back on theirs or a stolen horse at any time they so like. Let's hear it for Hannah and the Mongols. Next up, we have Christine Shapiro in 14th century Mongol civilian armor. Now, what she's wearing here is more civilian, but it would also be worn underneath the katangu degel. This also allows for lots of practicality, lots of mobility, as well as utility on and off the battlefield. This was made by a Mongol gentleman in Mongolia and is about as authentic as you can get without digging it up out of the ground. What's the name of your hat? Do you don't know? Okay.
Smashing. It's a smashing cap.
Sure, Larry knows.
But one of the clues is today, as then you see the secret was layers. The area that they mentioned, northern China, the Mongol areas, all the way through sections of Russia, the whole layer is layer after layer after layer. This way you could adjust easily to the climates and what you had going on in the area. Keep in mind when the hordes went loose, they traveled all the way into Western Europe. So they were able to handle a wide variety of environments as well as climates. And as you imagine, if you think about the area involved, that armor that you just saw at one point covered about a third of the world was in that style of armor. And that's something when we think armor, we think 15th century plate. You have to realize that that Russian katangu was probably more widely spread than any other piece of armor in the planet. This is the basis of that outfit. And thank you very much, Christine.
Let's hear it for Christine. Next in armor, we have Sandra Lanese, 14th century French, in a gorgeous, gorgeous suit. I kind of have a crush on this suit armor. Not even kind of.
At this point, you see that metalworking has progressed predominantly further than earlier. There's very little of her that doesn't have a plate of metal between a nasty person and her. Arms, legs, all the way up through the upper body. That hinged, articulated section of armor inspired much by the Katanga that you saw earlier. The Russian style finally reached Europe, and they said, that's a much better idea than what we're doing. So the flexible style of body armors came to the European front a few decades after they began running into it from the Mongols.
Some of the other changes you can see here is the lower legs are called the greaves. These are case greaves, and one of the hardest pieces of armor to manufacture accurately. And this is, in the 14th century, this is our first example of closed-in lower legs, which would matter greatly for a mounted fighter. If they're on top of their horse, their legs are at weapon and head level for a lot of folks, so they need to be well protected. And on the ground, they also need to be well protected from stomps and other cuts and grappling techniques that could attack the calf and cause failure to the legs. You also see on her body armor there, you see those little studs? Anybody ever played D&D or something where they called it studded leather, right? Studded leather isn't really a thing. See, anytime you saw studs on the outside, it's because they were holding plates on the back. So while I love Dungeons and Dragons, Pathfinder and the like, Pathfinder and the like, those studs that you see offer no extra protection, but they are holding on plates that are held underneath. They would be the same thing as splinted armor. Fully encased, gorgeous, and straight from a 14th century manuscript, we have Sandra Lanese. Next up, we have Tristan Brumley in 14th century French.
Ooh la la.
We see the veil, classic of all the medieval periods. Head coverings were very important for both males and females at the time, and men would wear an army cap. Even the poorest of folks would have something covering their head, but the nicer it was, chances are the better one you had. We still see the echo of the earlier Norman from the long sleeves, familiar linen fabric, as well as the layers here. The coloration often told you about how important this person was and how much money they had at the very least, because more vibrant colors were harder to dye. More vibrant colors were harder to keep looking good.
Also at this time period, you started to run into different areas where colors denoted certain professions. For instance, the legal profession dressed in blue and yellow. And you started to run into some designated color combinations enforced by the king, that he only wanted certain people in certain areas. And of course, we've all heard the stories of the royal purples, correct? Poor little sea urchins that had to give their lives to give a drop of purple. So the color is very important, and it lets you know the status of the person even from a distance.
And unfortunately, black is a very expensive color, my favorite color, but a very expensive color to dye a fabric that way. Even with modern dyes that aren't very expensive and lots of help, it's very hard to dye something black or purple and keep it looking really good. But we have a great example of here with Tristan Brumley. Thank you very much. Next up we have Emily in a 15th century Italian set of armor. The helmet she's wearing is of Arbute. There are some anachronistic bars across the visor for safety, but otherwise following very good lines from the 15th century.
Again, you see our progression heading towards the fully enclosed suit of armor. We have additional steel, we have additional articulation, so that even in the places where previously had gaps, the shoulders, the knees, where there were vulnerable areas, now we have overlapping layers of metal to keep the person safe inside. The body is still using that articulated multiple plate format, backed behind the leather, our nice studded leather from a moment ago. But now we have even more mobility, but more protection all at the same time. This is an outfit ready to go onto the battlefield, whether it's on horseback or on foot, and still protect its wearer to the utmost into the middle of battle.
Some of the other things you can notice on here, you see the chain hanging from the helmet? This is technology that continued from the Romans on through. This is at least 14 centuries of this being useful equipment. This stuff here is the predecessor to things like Kevlar and Spectra, a flexible, knife-proof material that could guard in certain mobile areas like around the neck, or in later periods in the armpit, as well as in the groin area. So that technology, while good then, stays good, just not for all the same reasons. Other things you can see if she holds up her beautifully painted shield. That beautifully painted shield was very important to let people know who she was on the battlefield. With that helmet, we can't tell if she's friend or foe. But the information on that shield would tell us, good guy, bad guy, rich or poor. Good guy, don't get him. Bad guy, are they rich? Yes, ransom them. If they're not, just off them and maybe take their cheap armor and sell it. Loot the corpse, loot the corpse.
Also, one of the reasons that body armor was made out of lots of small plates at this point is you could adjust them to fit a large number of people. Add a plate, remove a plate, so that that style of armor could be adjusted easily from one wearer to the next. One of our problems with full amounts of plate you run into later is fit one guy. And even one of the best examples being Henry VIII, who had like 5 full suits of armor depending on what year it was being made, because he got a little fatter as he got older. We've all seen the pictures, right?
If you can take a look at Emily's feet, you see sabatons. Not only is that one of our favorite bands, it is a great way to protect your feet. These sabatons had to be mobile. They had to flex and move with your feet. These were the original steel-toed shoes. A beautiful 15th century kit for Emily. Next up, we have Becca Huck in 16th century Rus.
Becca is wearing a silk and velvet kakushnik hat that is pearl beaded with silver and gold designs. The hat is stiffened with a leather center. Under the kakushnik is a soft linen cap with a silk veil pinned to it with beaded veil pins. She is wearing 2 linen underdresses and a brocade overdress. The cuffs and collars separate pieces and are linen backed, heavy brocade, wool and linen blend, with pearls additionally stitched to the design. They fasten with gold foil wrapped thread, braiding loops over cast bronze buttons. On her feet are a pair of hand knit wool socks and soft leather shoes.
And if Becca would get a little scandalous for us and show us a little ankle and some underdress here. Again, we see layers used time and time again. And one of the coolest things about this is that this outfit was researched, dedicated down to the individual detail, and created by the model, Becca Huck. So all this is so helpful.
And there's not 5 more Russian women that looks just like her hiding underneath of the dress. So that would be cool.
Next up, we have Austin Wimberly in 16th century English in a replica outfit of King Henry VIII. And he's looking for his next one. You see the collar around his neck? That's a collar of maintenance. And jewels and other designs would represent his accomplishments, his status, and obviously as the king, he'd have pretty much the best one in whichever one he liked. There happens to be a cod piece, if you didn't notice. The cod pieces were used not only for protection, but for showing off, like a big truck with big wheels on it might be. So that cod piece shows, I'm a man, and it's sticking out of my tunic. If you look at some of the suits that King Henry fought in, or were made for him that he didn't quite make it to fight in, they also had giant metal articulated cod pieces for no good reason.
You'll see a lot of additional additions to this outfit that have no purpose whatsoever other than to show, look how extremely rich I was. Let's put lace on top of pieces of lace that are then laced into other pieces of lace. Slash and puff so that you can clearly see the highest quality of even his underthings that he's wearing underneath of the layers of all of those lace additions on top of things. This was an outfit made to impress, and it succeeds admirably. Yes. Ladies and gentlemen, King Henry VIII.
So in just a moment, we're going to have everybody come back down and line up for a good group picture, and also so you can ask questions. You can ask them questions about the historical accuracy of their stuff, about how they acquired it or made it themselves. Feel free to raise your hand, and I'll move around with the mic and let you get some questions. Let's come on down this way. Let's line up front.
Let's go half and half. Chronological across the picture.
I just don't want to kick the back.
Beautiful, beautiful.
I know. Kind of like a steering wheel. You never take this wheel into a battle.
All right, so here's our lineup for the fashion show. We can see the progression running on down the line. You can see that linen was used in the beginning. Linen is still used. We have some really great examples of linen that have survived the ages, that have been dug up out of the ground in the past 50 to 100 years, and still we can see the embroidery from them, that have been preserved in royal archives that are still gorgeous to this day. Linen made from flax is an extremely durable thread and is extremely good, even for the sport that we compete in today. We still use that as the highest level. You also see lots of wool, and that wool continues to be a great product. Is anyone in here a hiker or backpacker? Wool socks, you know, are some of your best friends. And Trey can speak again about the progression of plate and armor.
Again, is you get a great example here, ignoring the Roman that throws everything off by 1,000 years, because let's be honest, they were the best of their day, and for the next 6 centuries. You can see that they slowly moved back to individual pieces of wire that they were able to work, and then they slowly added plates of metal, like on the Russian outfit, to increase protection in only the most vulnerable areas. Then additional plates, then you see the Russian influence come in with the Katangu, then you move on to more and more articulated armor as you move down the line, ultimately leading to as much metal plate as possible on the body to protect it in even the hottest, heaviest battle. At this point, you've got to realize you've got both firearms and Emily's armor at the end. You've got gunpowder weapons on the field. You've got bows. You've got arrows. You've got weapons and horses. So anything and everything would be bringing the most amount of violence possible towards her. So they did the very best that they could to armor at the time. So you can see the progression working from one side to the next of how they just found the vulnerable areas and they just added additional layers of protection to keep them alive on the battlefield.
Also, we can take a look, it's very clear at certain periods of history that fancy jewelry and added accoutrement is extremely important for your status in society. We can see it very strongly in the Viking styles, and then progressing again all the way up to the 16th century. The prettier stuff you had, the cooler you were, and a lot of people still go that way today. The better cosplay you have, or the more accurate fabrics, the cooler that outfit is. So do we have any questions for the folks up front? I'll tell you what, go ahead and shout it out and I'll carry the mic to them.
After our Roman friend on the left there, I'm seeing a lot of swords with blood tips. Is that a factor of how the reproductions are done, or is that just they didn't really have stabbing weapons up until?
Well, I'll take part of this one. Part of this is we actually bash each other over the heads with all of these weapons. So these are functional utility weapons that we're using. Obviously, the pieces in their day and age would have been a good deal sharper, and
that was light.
And that was light. So this is a safety factor. Also, you may have heard Dragon Con doesn't like people walking around with lots of amounts of sharp, pointy things, especially exposed. So we have a couple of different reasons to limit the accuracy on that aspect. Otherwise, the weapons generally do represent the style, the shape, and the overall construction at the time period. But for a couple different safety reasons, we had to make modifications there.
Though you'll also notice that around Sandra's time period, if she'll hold up her longsword that she's carrying, very much around that time period, as more and more plate was coming out, it was very much harder to get through it with a sword strike, and they would be blunted, and they would move to a half-swording technique, which was to grab the blade, a non-sharpened blade, but would have a very sharpened point to really punch through in some thin sections in armpits and other places like that. Very good question. Next.
I'm specifically interested in the fastenings on the greaves. For those that are wearing them, with holding them just really tight leather straps around, or do you have any kind of suspension going on up top?
So the question was about the suspension of the greaves. Let's see. Sandra, would you like to answer that first?
Sure. These ones are actually formed perfectly for my legs, although but if they're well made and they've got the right curves in it, it just fits like a glove. Just strap it on, you're good to go.
Including the upper bit, same width?
It's just below my knee. You can't really see it because of my leg armor, but it doesn't go up into my knee because I've got this.
Even if you look at some of these earlier pieces, such as Rich and Ivan have on, the metal is literally sitting on the top of the upper foot. So that's actually supporting all of the weight above it is basically sitting on the top of the foot, either with the splints here, as well as the half greaves that Rich has on. And often, if there was a big enough calf, having a short strap above the calf muscle would keep it from riding down lower so that you weren't doing too much damage. You can't take Rich anywhere. To help it from sliding down the leg while you're there.
Yes, I'm me.
All right, Sam, behind you, we have someone next.
Okay. Next.
Just a question. I've heard the term brigandine. Is that an actual term of armor that's used? Brigandine is like leather with metal rivets. I'm guessing what y'all were mentioning earlier, the studded leather has plates underneath it, but is that what brigandine is, or is that even a legitimate term?
Yes, that's exactly what it is. It is a perfectly legitimate term. Wonderful question. I will pass this one off to Trey because he's made several brigandines for competitors around the country.
Brigandine is a style that incorporates usually the individual smaller plates mounted to a leather over outfit, or cloth, or items such as canvas, wool, and sometimes held together and covered in, such as in Sanders' outfit, with a velveteen or even a fancier material to the outside that showed, again, ostentatious wealth. And surprisingly, some of the pretty materials are ridiculously strong. We've all heard of the strength of silk. Those type of situations. Some of these outfits may look like it's just a vanity type decision to make. It's surprisingly strong, rip resistant, and damages. It doesn't damage easily as well, especially when back. Now, brigandine covers a wide variety. You have brigadine type 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, depending on the country, depending on the location. There's a wide variety of different types of brigandine that you see. And that it depends, but surprisingly you see stunning similarity between the Italian and Northern European stuff, because there's only so many ways that you can make small plates to curve carefully and tightly fit up against the human body. So instead it looks like a piece of leather to the outside, but you'll see the same thing. You get little small individual plates to the backside. So the gaps that are there are ridiculously tiny, and it would be a miraculous hit to miss any and all of that plate. But that way they don't have to form fit an exacting piece exactly to the shape of Rich's body. That way the leather gives you that level of flex, and that allows some wider range of person to be able to wear that.
Swag.
Absolutely.
And Rich, can you hold up your forearm again? That's the same type of construction on his forearms, as well as some other parts of his arm.
But you'll also see, if Ivan will hold his up, then they've done, the Russian look was to have the splint to the outside, and Rich's is basically they move the metal to the inside. The leather's the outer layer. So the metal plates on Rich are hidden underneath.
All right, that was the next thing I saw, man.
Back to that, why is the metal near the skin? Wouldn't it make more sense, or wouldn't it be more comfortable to have the leather underneath and the metal on top?
Yes, I'm working on getting naked.
We usually have to stop him to do that.
So as you can see, there's padding under, so there's cloth, so it's not against the skin. So it's not a big deal. It's not against the skin. It's against the padded armor underneath.
Why would they have it underneath? Like, other than that, is it easier to make?
Because when you do get hit and cut, it's still a blunt force trauma, and the padding takes up that force, and it doesn't go to your body.
But why would the metal be on the inside instead of the outside?
I don't know.
One of the easier, as a guy that's made a number of these different suits, one of the answers to that question is, if you have metal on the outside, you notice that Emily is stunningly shiny and looks amazing. After Saturday, it's not going to look like that. Rich's armor, the leather can be completely destroyed, and you just replace the leather to the outside. You're able to make it look new with a small amount of work just by riveting into a new piece. It can be dented, scratched, and tore up, and you'll never see it by being hidden underneath of a fabric or a leather. So you're able to make the appearance of it look as good as new with a small amount of work, as opposed to having exposed metal that you're going to have to hammer out, take out the dents, smooth, sand, and polish it all the way back to the level. So by having these pieces hidden underneath of leather, You don't have to sand it, you don't have to polish it, you don't have to do nearly the level of care to make it look pretty, because your outer layer, the leather or the velvet or the linen or wool that you're using on the outer layer, that's your look. So it's much easier to change the outer appearance.
Good question.
With leather on the outside as well, there's less of a chance that it's going to catch on one of the exposed plates, which is nice.
Two quick questions. It looks like impossible to walk in the armor. Is it, or?
Cartwheel?
Would anyone like to perform something dexterous?
No.
What?
So yes, the answer is yes. It's hard and
It's,
No.
it's not hard at all,
No, it's
actually.
not.
It's because it's so formed into your body.
And then, can you,
Hold on, 1 second.
There you go.
and then codpiece, where does that word come from? I know, but that's what came after
Henry?
that.
It might have looked like a fish.
That's something we can add, some information we can have for next year's
Thank you.
We got questions in the back? All right, let's hear it.
So, the Mongolian kit, I see a lot of notes in the cloth. I'm just kind of wondering how sure was that fabric? Is it comparable to the velvet and the next material we're talking about?
Yeah, so this is wool. So far, so good. I've had it for about 2 years now, and I haven't had to replace, I've only had to replace my gorget, but the cloth is fine over the armor.
All right, good question. There was another one over in this area, man.
I'm wondering about the inside of the helmet. There's some sort of padding system inside. What is it made out of?
The original, while he's pulling his helmet out, the original ones were often a linen stuffed with horsehair. And it's basically very similar to the inner suspension lining on the inside of a hard hat. You have a section that goes across the top of the head, front and back, and it ties so that as you loosen or tighten that knot, it allows you to change to the elevation that the helmet sits on top of your head. Horsehair obviously was a material that could get wet, dry a million times and not have any degradation of material. It provided just as much padding over and over and over again.
Hence you get hit in the face.
Yes, they could. Usually your linen would wear out that's holding the horsehair in place far sooner than the horsehair would stop being an effective padding source.
In the back, sir.
I remember from the previous year where people were talking about on their helmet, resting on their shoulders, and they got smacked in the head, and it finished straight out to their neck. Is that actually historically accurate, or is it modern ad?
It depends on the helmet, but I'll pass this one off to Trey because his works that way.
Exactly, and mine, for purposes of this battle, this format, I specifically do that since my chiropractor, my co-announcer over here insisted that my spine not get wrecked doing this. Several of the styles of helmets had a much lower cut on them, so that was a possibility where it could rest on it. But if you look at Ivan's helmet here, he has a lower faceplate, but the Spangen, they have no articulation to the side. There's no solid plate for purposes. So this is that style of helmet and that generation of helmet. There was no way to be able to do that. So all the head impact was fully just absorbed with and taken by the neck and the upper body structure. Once you moved over to the bar boot style with the opposite end, that helmet can easily, on a large pair of shoulders or on a thick padded neck coif or aventail, would be able to rest on top of the shoulders to take some of the damage. The problem with doing so is you basically limit your ability to look left and right. You now look left and right the way I do, which is turning my upper body. So that is, you're now a tank turret and you're a pretty slow moving one at that point. But, you know, no spinal damage yet.
Some of the helmets, like what you'll see him wearing tomorrow, as well as what you'll see Austin wearing tomorrow, were archer-style helmets that were large across the brim, but had a separate face piece. They weren't quite as expensive or hard to make, and more universal for sizing, and they could raise their shoulders to move that faceplate up and guard more of their face, and then drop it back down. And we, as of a few years ago, still had some folks fighting in Europe that were still doing that same crazy thing, and it kept them protected.
Like a salad or ice and type thing?
A bever.
A bever.
It's a chin, it basically, imagine a large armored chin piece and a bill And it's like their entire face was open, and then they would see someone take a swing at them, and they'd go, uh-oh, like a clam, and then they would open again to see if the shot was coming, and then they'd close it again, and then they'd open it up again. It was hysterical and terrifying to watch. And they still do it. There are still fighters that fight in that because it is an authentic style of armor. It's just not what I would take to the battlefield.
I saw a hand over here, yes.
Yeah, could you talk a bit about the different articulation we're seeing in the gauntlet armor and how that may have changed over time?
Absolutely. Do we have any early period gauntlets on anybody down there? Josh, what are you wearing? Leather gloves? You mean you don't have gauntlets? Oh no, his hand get cut pretty good. However, Ivan does have chain mittens that he's not wearing tonight. Those chain mittens would have been the very first styles of gauntlets that we had, using the same type of fabric over a really heavy padding, and he fought with that crazily for a very long time. That's why we call him Ivan the Terrible, or Ivan the Crazy Ivan, and lots of other things. He's still got most of his fingers, so it works pretty well. And as we move on down time period, they have smaller plates on the fingers. If you look at riches are actually a historical anachronism made for safety. Riches are made to look like individual fingers, but they're kept together for the purposes of not getting our hands broken while we're out there on the field. And then you can see Emily's gauntlets are fewer plates. And again, that reflects the larger sizing of plates that could be done later on, as well as, for some reason, we don't know why in the 14th century, they had bigger plates on their body at that point, but only had small ones on their finger. It wasn't until the 15th century that we started to see them get bigger. We all really wish they would have done that. Kind of like the guy down at the end was, they would have made pockets instead of ice bags.
So, as Sem was saying, these are anachronisms. My period would have individual lanes for the fingers, protecting the fingers. And I just decided that's, one too many risks.
But you also you started off with plated to leather articulation, just to go back to the types of articulation. If you go to the Bisbee style gauntlet, slightly between these two periods, they would have had large metal plates that would have just been hard mounted to a leather glove, similar to how Rich's gorget protection was done earlier. They would have just individual, one for the back of the hand, backs of the fingers, individual pieces that are articulated. They then moved to the metal articulation, such as at Emily's down here, where you have no gaps between the metal and all of the pieces are completely enclosed.
And believe me, we're all looking for the earliest possible example we can find of the enclosed gauntlet, so we can document, like, no, we found one, like all these other professional historians haven't found one yet, but we're going to try to find one. The earliest one I've seen was 1430.
1430.
The earliest one I've seen is 1430. So these 14th century kits, or a lot of us are using 15th century style gauntlets, just for basic hand protection and survival.
I wanted to ask, regarding the gauntlets, is it possible to use a ranged weapon with those on? Any kind?
A spear.
It's pretty tough in Emily's style gauntlets. It's pretty tough to even strap buffles with those things.
Yeah, you can't do it. You couldn't do it properly.
And depending on the construction style of a crossbow, the hand crank styles, you could work those, pull those back, and they usually had just a single large trigger. So all you needed was to be able to move the fingers. You didn't have a trigger to fire them off. So there were the heavier crossbow styles would still be able to be used in those, is that an hourglass? The hourglass style gauntlets.
Particularly Italian crossbowmen were known as mercenaries, hired all over Europe for a long period of time. Yes, and they would wear maybe one plate sticking out about halfway down their hand, so they'd still have some finger dexterity instead of fully enclosed. They were certainly not expecting to be fighting hand-to-hand with swords in their hand any more than they absolutely have to, but we know Emily's going to go out there and try to bash us in the face, so she's got good gauntlets. What else we got out here? Yes, sir?
Yeah, on Emily, on the knees, those wings sticking out, what are those?
The wings sticking out on the side? And there's a few different designs. If you got a... If you have a fan sticking out on the side, there's some spade shapes. There are rondelles, which are round ones. You can see that on Sandra's elbows, she has rondelles sticking out, which are a different shape, but Emily has similar shapes, similar fans on the elbow cops. The fancy name for the elbow cop is actually a cooter, but because of its modern connotations, we usually call it and the fans are designed for the diffused variety, including decorative, particularly in the 13th century.
The burp is for those large peanuts, ovals, or spades. is we can't cover anything into the gap in between. So the more large and fancy part there prevents a blade from getting into the one spot that a small shot is likely to make that arm useless at that point. So those different styles and patterns, besides having an aesthetic reason, were designed to protect that soft inner arm, because there's always parts on every suit of armor you can't adequately protect. She has to be able to bend her arm properly, and if it was full metal into the inner part of her arm, she wouldn't be able to move the arm properly. So she has to leave a gap there, but protect it by having that piece on extending above the arm to be able to protect it.
We're going to take our last question over here. We're saving a little bit of time, so y'all get to meet these folks. They're going to walk out. You can take a look at the armor. You can talk to them. Don't punch them. You'll hurt your hand. And they might hit you with a sword, you don't know. But our last question is going to be right here.
Yeah, I was just curious. As far as the metal that you guys are using, is that steel or is it iron? And if so, is that historically accurate?
Different suits are going to vary based on that. I'm going to start down at that far end and walk this way and let them answer that. Accuracy of the metal of your arm.
And type.
I'm gonna let Noah, who owns the suit, talk about it.
What type of metal, Noah?
What type of metal is used in this, and is it accurate to what a real suit would have had?
Oh, this suit would use iron back in the day, but this currently is a steel. This is just regular steel. High carbon? I have no idea.
Chances are this is not a high carbon one here, because mail, there's no use to have really hardened stuff. And the helmets, I don't know of any hardening technology predating this early. Let's pass on to Josh.
Chainmail halberds in the 11th and 12th centuries were usually made out of iron rings. This is steel because wrought iron is difficult to obtain these days. And the helmet could have been made out of low carbon steels, but they were mostly made out of iron as well. They might have been case hardened to add some rigidity to them, but they're usually iron.
Right, my arm and leg protection and chainmail made out of low carbon steel, so it's historically accurate. My helmet's made out of stainless steel, so it's not how it's supposed to be. It's slightly different with the X. Like most of the X body were made out of mild steel, but they usually was high carbon steel, short blade welded to the whole body. So this would have been historically correct if I had a sharp blade on this side. But that's a training equipment.
So my knees, my gauntlets, my helmet are all stainless steel, and obviously they're not accurate to period armor. My legs here, arms, elbows, body armor, that's all spring steel made out of chromoly 4130, which is automotive grade steel. So that's not really accurate, but it was heat treated to spring steel toughness and flexibility. So that part is accurate to what they would have done. And the accuracy of the kit to the 1380s England is probably about 80 to 90% accurate to some effigies.
So most of mine are just steel plates underneath the fabric, spring steel, yeah, and then steel and chainmail for the helmet. To be honest, I'm not sure how I think you can answer that question better.
She actually has Anna has welded chainmail on her helmet, and technically they actually would have gone with riveted chainmail, which is what my helmet has. I can tell you that I freaking hate it because all of these weapons clip the rivets, and so parts of my chainmail will come apart. I much prefer the welded. It stands up to our sport much better. Her helmet is stainless, and the shoulder cups are stainless. Are your bracer or your bazoos?
There's other just steel.
Just regular steel. I know that the plates on the inside. If you remember what Trey was saying, well, I guess this is really, really light. It's got spring steel, little tiny plates. They're much smaller than what Rich would have worn, but they're spring steel as well, just for weight. This kit was designed specifically for duels, so that it actually was very light to wear.
I think my shoulders are stainless. They were basically gifted to me, so hey, free armor. As you see, this is steel as well. It's not the iron, but it still rusts. Gotta fix that. And let's see. Actually, my helmet and my greaves just because we don't have the materials at ACAP.
So my arms and legs are spring steel. My helmet, including the aventail, is stainless steel. This is a welded chainmail aventail. And in addition to that, my corazine and the plates underneath it are stainless as well. I know that the stainless steel is not period accurate. I'm not sure about the spring steel.
And one of the things about some of the structural steels, the 4130 chromoly, after tempering, it has many of the same qualities: thickness, toughness, Rockwell hardness, to some very well tempered hardened steels that were done in here. So it's while they didn't have the same uniformity of the alloy, and it's still, the spring steel has about the same qualities as the best armor would have been. All right. Well, if you want pictures, go ahead and take the last set. Otherwise, feel free to come up and question our guests, or best, you can walk out there and find some fans to talk to. Take a look at their armor. Also, if you don't get a chance to talk to them long enough tonight, they will be in the Armory on Sunday, because tomorrow we're going to be in the Sheridan fighting. Make sure you come on out and take a look. It's going to be full contact in these suits of armor with these swords. You don't want to miss that. Thank you very much. Y'all have a great evening. Enjoy your con.